Nous nous retrouvons.
So we're back for a fairly technical, small roundtable. I thought if we talked about compliance, it wouldn't bring people flooding into the room, but it's very clear and very interesting, you'll see. I'm not ashamed to announce a roundtable on compliance questionnaires. A coherent approach to the market, an example of the latest progress made by technical committees. We have 3 experts in compliance with us. Next to me, Michel ILYAS, Compliance Officer for FILHET ALLARD Maritime, then Nina NESIC, Compliance Officer, AGCS, and Pauline MOUILLERON, Compliance Officer, SCOR. Good afternoon to all 3 of you. You've worked hard on compliance questionnaires within a working group organized by France Assureur. Why this working group? What was the purpose of this work when you began? In 2019, a roundtable took place within the frame of COMAT. We talked about embargoes, sanctions, and the laundering of money. An initiative had been taken to have a joint questionnaire on these topics. It was COMAT and Armateur de France that took this decision. Work was begun but was suspended in 2020 owing to the pandemic. In fact, in 2021, the question arose once again because of negative feedback from the market as to the absence of harmonization of such questionnaires. What was at stake wasn't the principle of sanctions, AML, CFT, but the differences depending on the insurers. And that generated a problem when it came to management by customers and brokers, and the lack of a single model for the French market, which you do have on the Nordic market, is a brake on the development of the French market, in fact. So in 2021, 3 companies resumed this work, SCOR, AGCS, and FILHET ALLARD Maritime. The idea was to draft a questionnaire used by the whole of the French shipping industry. It was reaffirmed in September 2021 at a meeting organized by CESAM that this questionnaire was really opposite. It comprised brokers, shippers, members of COMAT, and others. And in December 2021, a working group was set up under the aegis of France Assureur, the idea being to finalize the questionnaire. And furthermore, in addition to the 3 companies we represent, there were representatives from Carex, Generali, MS Amlin, and others. At the end of the work, we had 2 types of questionnaire. A questionnaire on laundering and the financing of terrorism, an annual questionnaire, and a questionnaire on sanctions and embargoes. That is partly annual due diligence and due diligence for single operations. You met a lot. Was it complicated? You moved ahead quite quickly in any event. Well, no. In fact, we wondered about the content of the questionnaire. A risk appetite when it comes to sanctions depends on the insurer. So there was a lot of very interesting content, but we had no problem, per se, organizing things. Nina, what do you have in these questionnaires? They now exist. I think they're available on the website. What would you like to say about this questionnaire? They were published last week, and the first questionnaire you have is in English because we are dealing with the market we're talking about today, and the French version will soon be available. 3 main points. This is just a model for a questionnaire, and it's optional. Companies are free to use it or not, and they can also modify it. However, when it comes, they have to comply with compliance and competition rules. Second point, the questionnaire is designed, well, it's just a model. The idea is to encompass broadly the market. We want to have a single vector to gather information that will enable all insurance companies to collect the information they need in order to meet statutory requirements. We didn't want to go further than the law. The aim was, above all, to limit ourselves to what regulations call for without adding anything more. It's already a topic which is not easy for our broker colleagues and clients. We wanted to have this single form which met statutory requirements and can address the issue of having just one model to contend with. First of all, we have anti-money laundering. That's the first questionnaire. We wanted to gather data from customers, pool it. It'll depend on the company and their procedures. The idea is to have an annual questionnaire. It will depend on the company, in fact. And there are 3 questionnaires on sanctions, inspired by what you see on the market. There's a first questionnaire, which is called Open Cover. It's an annual questionnaire. It gathers the information you need in terms of underwriting and taking out an insurance policy. And then we have a question on hull and cargo, another questionnaire. We're just at the very beginning of the drafting of a new model, which will begin to be used by the various companies in the days that come, and no doubt it will evolve in light of feedback from the market and from customers, and also what we see on other markets in amongst competitors. We're not the first. It's a first French experience, but we haven't in any way instigated this kind of thing, and I'm sure Michel can say more about this. Michel, from an operational stance, how will these questionnaires be used? Do they have to be adapted? And I might add a very practical question. You have to fill in a questionnaire. Does it take 3 hours, 3 weeks? Well, I think that these questionnaires, well, yes, this was published the 20th June, but owing to the war in Ukraine and sanctions against Russia, which have ensued, we had to collect a rather sensitive information and wanted to be very efficient. We've already adapted the questionnaire. We had to improve it, optimize it, in order to collect key information in terms of sanctions. We have very specific EU criteria to see whether inflows or outflows come under certain sanctions. So we optimize the questionnaire in order to facilitate the collecting of information. It takes time. It doesn't take just 5 minutes, but once the questionnaire has been filled in full, you can collect all the information in one fell swoop, and that means that you don't have to have toings and froings between the insurer, the broker, the customer. The customer has operational and economic constraints, and the more time this kind of thing takes, the more this will have a consequence. So we wanted to optimize the questionnaire to check whether a given entity is compliant or not. We talked about adaptation, according to you. Will things evolve a lot? And under pressure from whom? As Nina had said, when it comes to AML-CFT, the questionnaire depends on the risks. Each operator has its own AML-CFT risks and has to adapt the questionnaire in due course. When it comes to sanctions, the questionnaire will have to be adapted in light of feedback, regulations which are evolving. There may be some additional criteria which have to be covered in the questionnaire, and likewise domestic policies, or company policies rather. Companies have their own approach in terms of risk appetite. In my view, what's very important indeed is digitization. Currently, as a broker, you have to manage different compliance policies with different lists of countries, and depending on the insurance, you have the insurers, the co-insurers, which will have to validate things in light of their own policy. There will be a huge volume of data, and that means that processing things takes longer, and that has consequences for the end user. So digitization is the next step, in my view. I agree, therefore, with Nina and Pauline that this is just the beginning. It's the beginning of this voyage, and I'm sure we'll continue to work together and be successful. By way of conclusion, if there's one thing you should highlight in the questionnaire, what would you say? We have this single questionnaire for the French market, and that makes it possible to ensure that the French market remains attractive in this special regulatory context. France is the only country, unless I'm mistaken, within the EU that lays down such demands in terms of identification on non-life insurers in terms of terrorism and money laundering. So that will create a more even playing field. I think it's an excellent first experience of cooperation between different links in the chain, and I hope we'll have an opportunity to work on other topics in order to facilitate the life of all players on the market and above all customers, because the aim is to simplify their life insofar as possible. Michel. I'd like to wind up by mentioning Henry Ford from the motor industry, who said that coming together is the beginning. Staying together is progress. Working together means success. And I think we have succeeded to achieve wonderful things, and I hope we'll continue to do so. I think they deserve a round of applause, both the questionnaires and those who produce them. Thank you to all three of you. And thank you for talking about compliance in such simple, clear terms with us.